to deal with the demand that continues to possess those who see profit around every corner. And so this committee deals with the issues of crime, but I have been here long enough to realize that as we began my tenure in the United States Congress, crack, cocaine were the kings. And no one was paying attention to any of that but the DEA, because it was in communities, unfortunately, that were at the lowest level in many instances of poverty, particularly crack. Only to the opioid epidemic did we find common ground. I think it is important to find common ground now because your concern is my concern. So let me begin by acknowledging Administrator Milgram as the head of the DEA. You face the Herculean task of managing the flow of illicit drugs across our borders, coping with the impact of newly developed drugs, and addressing the concerns of the public health crisis of substance addiction and abuse. With the administration's whole of government approach, your agency stands at the epicenter of the storm. This is, at the least, the third hearing this year where fentanyl policy will be a major subject of inquiry. As a likely byproduct of interruptions in treatment, recovery, and prevention services, and stress induced by the unprecedented COVID-19 pandemic, fentanyl and fentanyl-related substances have emerged as the nation's deadliest drug threat. And might I add, the impact that it is having on our youth, with the misrepresentation of pink pills being what they had heard they were, but now they are immediate death sentences, immediate. Fentanyl is a major contributor to the ongoing opioid epidemic, leading to alarming increases in overdose deaths. With nearly 300 people dying each day of drug overdoses, no community is safe. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has reported that fentanyl-related deaths accounted for more than 70,000 of the 107,622 overdose deaths that occurred in the U.S. in 2021, continuing a two-decade-long trend of increasing overdose deaths. In my home state of Texas, fentanyl was linked to more than 1,600 fatal overdoses that year and more than 2,000 overdose deaths in 2022. Nationally, more than two-thirds of the reported 107,081 drug overdoses deaths in 2022 involved synthetic opioids, primarily manufactured fentanyl. Despite a slight decrease in 2022 from the previous year, fentanyl overdoses remain the leading cause of death for adults 18 to 45. To the horror of every parent, as I said earlier, teen overdoses have been reported in every corner of the country. To drive home this issue, our March hearing even featured a witness whose child died of a fentanyl-related overdose. According to the CDC, more than 2,200 teens fatally overdosed in the 2.5-year period from July 2019 to December 2021, with fentanyl involved in 84% of those deaths. Given its potency, even small amounts of fentanyl can be lethal, making it particularly dangerous for individuals, especially teenagers, unaware of its presence in drugs they receive from friends or from sources on the internet. Fentanyl and fentanyl-related substances have been found hidden in and mixed with other illicit drugs, such as cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamine. And communities of every kind are being flooded with fentanyl masquerading as prescription drugs. Teenagers are falling victim to counterfeit pills that are highly addictive, deadly, and made and marketed by drug traffickers to resemble authentic, less potent prescription medications. We must do all that we can to break the cycle of addiction and even the needless loss of life of fentanyl and fentanyl-related substances. This includes making sure that the DEA has the tools it needs to perform its vital role in combating the illicit production, distribution, diversion from legitimate sources and trafficking of these deadly substances to prevent their flow into our communities. In addition to working with this crisis of addiction, the DEA works closely with local, state, tribal, territorial, federal, and international law enforcement agencies to target every facet of the illicit drug supply chain and every level of drug trafficking organizations that threaten the health and safety of our communities. By targeting international drug trafficking organizations to dismantle fentanyl manufacturing and distribution networks. The agency works to disrupt the supply chain and reduce the availability of these dangerous substances on the streets of America, from Mexico cartels to Indian and Chinese source precursor chemicals, as well as Chinese money laundering operations that facilitate the cartel's operation. But to truly address this crisis, we must address the flow of illicit fentanyl and fentanyl-related substances into the United States and our communities, while also reducing the demand, which is fueled by addiction to these and other drugs. That is why I introduced H.R. 4272, the Stop Fentanyl Now Act, a comprehensive response to the recent surge in overdoses and overdose deaths that address both the supply and demand for fentanyl and fentanyl-related substances. I encourage my colleagues to co-sponsor. Relying on a whole-of-government approach, my bill integrates law enforcement, interdiction, public health initiatives, prevention and treatment, and public awareness and education. The agency also performs a vital role in educating the public about the risks associated with fentanyl and raising awareness about the potentially fatal consequences of its use. The outreach includes efforts directed at teenagers and young people with a focus on prevention and deterring experimentation. Director Milgram, I hope you can expand on the DEA's One Pill Can Kill campaign and discuss its impact on targeted groups. As one advocate said recently, community outreach must be outside the box, while another pointed out that there is no comprehensive education, prevention, or early intervention happening at the federal level or at the state level. The DEA's involvement is essential to enforcing the Controlled Substance Act, curbing the availability of fentanyl-related substances, and ultimately reducing the devastating impact these substances have on communities, particularly among vulnerable populations like teenagers. And statistics have shown that, again, the most incarcerated persons around the fentanyl issue are African-American men. And so we must find a way to fight and fight hard, but we must also find a way to deal with the question of justice. As fentanyl-related overdoses and overdose deaths continue to occur at a frightening pace, and African Americans are becoming the face of a second national wave of overdoses, the DEA is essential to addressing the crisis of addiction, abuse, and overdose deaths. I look forward to a constructive exchange on federal drug policy at today's hearing, and yield back. Mr. Chairman, I thank you, even as we are in our third hearing, for our hearing on this important topic, and I look forward to this committee being enormously constructive in the fight against this scourge and this death sentence for our people here in this nation. Thank you.
The gentlelady yields back. Thank you. And now I'll introduce, without objection, all other opening statements will be included in the record. I will now introduce today's witness, the Honorable Ann Milgram. Ann Milgram is the Administrator of the Drug Enforcement Administration and was sworn into this office on June 28, 2021. We welcome our witness and thank her for appearing today. We'll begin by swearing you in. Would you please rise and raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and beliefs, so help you God? Let the record reflect that the witness has answered in the affirmative. Thank you. Please know that your written testimony will be entered into the record in its entirety. I've read that. I've read your memo. Accordingly, we ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes. Do we have the yellow and the red light on this? Okay, so you'll see it when you get down to 1 minute. The yellow light will come on, and at 5 minutes, the red light will come on. We won't. There's nothing drastic that'll happen, but we would just ask you to wrap up as close to the 5 minutes as possible. With that, Ms. Milgram, you are recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Biggs and Ranking Member Jackson Lee. And good morning to members of the committee. Americans today are experiencing the most devastating drug crisis in our nation's history. It is like nothing that we have seen before. This is because one drug, fentanyl, has transformed the criminal landscape. Fentanyl is cheap to make, easy to disguise, and deadly to those who take it. Just 2 milligrams, the equivalent of a few grains of salt, can kill a person. Fentanyl, as has been noted, today is the leading cause of death for Americans between the ages of 18 to 45. More deaths than terrorism, more deaths than car accidents, more deaths than cancer, more deaths than COVID. And it is killing Americans from all walks of life In every state and in every community in this country, fentanyl is killing nearly 200 Americans each and every day. The drug cartels responsible for bringing fentanyl into this country are transnational and extremely violent enterprises. They rely on a global supply chain to manufacture and traffic fentanyl, and they rely on a global illicit financial network to pocket billions of dollars from those sales. At DEA, we have undertaken a transformation of our own to meet this moment. We have transformed our vision. We are now laser focused on the criminal organizations that are responsible for flooding fentanyl into our communities, the Sinaloa and Jalisco cartels. We have transformed our plan. We have built an entirely new strategic layer with 2 counter-threat teams, one for Sinaloa and one for Jalisco. These teams are made up of special agents, intelligence analysts, targeters, data scientists, subject matter experts in chemistry and finance. And just recently, we built a 3rd counter-threat team devoted solely to the illicit finance, the money laundering of these 2 cartels. These teams centralize all of DEA's intelligence. They are mapping the cartels. They are analyzing these criminal networks that now exist in more than 40 countries, and they are developing targeting information on the members of those networks, wherever they operate across the globe. We have also transformed our execution. We are drawing on the talent and expertise of the men and women of DEA in our 334 offices worldwide, and we are working as one DEA to defeat these criminal networks. We are also actively targeting every single aspect of the global fentanyl supply chain. We have made all these changes in the last 2 years to save lives, to stop fentanyl, and to defeat the 2 drug cartels that are responsible for bringing fentanyl into our communities and killing Americans. And we are already starting to see results. In April, we announced indictments against the network that is primarily responsible for the massive influx of fentanyl into the United States, the Chapitos network of the Sinaloa cartel. The Chapitos pioneered the manufacture and trafficking of fentanyl into the United States, and they control a global criminal enterprise that has killed hundreds of thousands of Americans. So we proactively targeted the Chapitos and their entire network, from their chemical suppliers in China to their fentanyl manufacturers and smugglers in Mexico to their distributors across the United States. The indictments we announced in April charged 28 members and associates of the Chapitos network, and 9 of those members of the 9 members of that network have now been taken into custody, several of them overseas, and the extraditions have begun. But we didn't stop there. In May, we announced the results of Operation Last Mile, where we tracked down and arrested 3,337 associates of the Sinaloa and Jalisco cartels who are operating here in the United States. We have identified that those 2 cartels are using social media and encrypted apps and are using these members or associates of the cartels across the United States to get fentanyl into the hands of individuals in our community. They're solving the last mile problem for the cartels. And again, these cartels are hiding fentanyl in fake pills that look like oxycodone, Xanax, Percocet, Adderall. They're also mixing it with cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamine, all to induce Americans to take fentanyl without knowing it and to drive addiction. And last month in June, we announced Operation Killer Chemicals, 3 cases in which we charged 4 Chinese chemical companies, 8 Chinese nationals. 2 of those Chinese nationals are now in American custody. And we charge them for knowingly providing customers in the United States and Mexico with precursor chemicals and the scientific know-how to make fentanyl. Those are the first ever charges brought against fentanyl precursor chemical companies in China. The 10,000 employees that I have the privilege of working with at DEA are the most committed and mission-driven people in federal law enforcement. They're laser focused on one goal, to save American lives, and every day they risk their lives for this mission. I ask for Congress's continued support of our work. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your testimony. I'm going to recognize now the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Nels, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Administrator Milgram, for being here. I'm a 30-year lawman. I was an old sheriff in Fort Bend County, Texas, and spent a great deal of time working with the DEA through the HIDA program. For those on this committee, those watching, if you don't know what HIDA is, It stands for High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area or Program. It was created by Congress with the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1988 and provides assistance to federal, state, local, and tribal law enforcement agencies operating in areas determined to be critical drug trafficking regions in the United States. It's administered under the Office of National Drug Control Policy, under the Executive Office of the President. There are currently 33 HIDAs across this 50 states, and there are 4 of them in the great state of Texas. I think the one I belong to was the most successful. I believe you're familiar with Mr. McDaniels. I spoke to him yesterday. He wanted me to tell you hello, but he said he wants his quarterly reports. He hasn't been receiving his quarterly reports, so get those quarterly reports to him if you don't mind. According to the website, the DEA plays a very active role. You have like 1,500 or so authorized special agents dedicated to the program. Is that correct?
I'd have to get back to you on the specific number, but yes, we have a large number of agents that work on HIDA across the United States.
Quite a few. Great, great. So I want to ask you a few questions to educate myself and other members of this committee as it relates to what HIDA teams are doing for the American people. And so how do HIDA teams play a role working with local jurisdictions to combat the fentanyl crisis?
So first, I would say, Congressman, that in addition to my current role, when I was the state attorney general for the state of New Jersey, I had the privilege to sit on 2 HIDAs, both the New York HIDA and the Philadelphia HIDA. And so I've had experience throughout my career on working with HIDA. And it's an incredible organization that brings together state, local law enforcement with federal law enforcement, everyone working as a team, sharing information. And right now, we're working across the country with HIDA. Some of the cases I just described to you have been done by HIDA enforcement groups. What we are doing is very actively trying to pull together through our counter threat teams. They are located, there's a global one now in Virginia. We are locating them also in all of our regional field divisions. So by the end of this year, we'll have counter threat teams in every field division. The idea is to be able to share our current information on those 2 cartels with HIDA, and then action facilitators, associates, and members of those cartels who we know are operating in the United States.
All right. You mentioned in your written testimony, I guess 8 pages, no talk of HIDA in here at all. I'm surprised there wasn't even a paragraph in there about HIDA. But talk about the Sinaloa and the Jalisco cartels. You know, Texas is faced with threats, obviously, bordering with Mexico from other cartels. What's the rationale with focusing on just those 2?
So one of the things we did when I came in was look at who is most responsible for the American deaths that we're seeing. And we very quickly identified that it is these 2 major cartels in Mexico. They are the largest cartels. In some instances, they do work with smaller cartels like the Gulf Cartel or the Northeast Cartel. We also track them because we know they're working with those larger cartels. But right now, with the CDC reported today for 2022, 110,511 Americans have died from drug poisonings. Yeah. So we have to be relentlessly focused on the people most responsible.
Is there a more dangerous drug than fentanyl out there that my residents, district members, Texas, are concerned about more than fentanyl?
Can I answer that in 2 ways? First, by saying widespread, fentanyl is the deadliest drug in the United States of America that we have ever faced. What we are tracking and what we are concerned about is that we have now shifted to synthetic or man-made drugs. Right. The only limit on that and what can be created are the chemicals that can be purchased. Right. So today, fentanyl is the deadliest drug, but I want to be, I want to be clear in saying we are actively tracking all of this to make sure that there is not a deadlier drug that gets created.
Are there any other plans, are there any plans at all to move HIDA from the Executive Office of the President to another department? OSADEF, anything, it's separate funding. Is there any plan to do any of that? There's rumors.
I have not heard that rumor.
Beautiful. I'd tell you one issue I have with my short time left. I see that your budget requests $7 million for zero-emission vehicles. I do believe that you could take that money and spend it elsewhere, tackling the most devastating drug crisis in the history of our country. So I want to thank you for your time. Please, Mike, again, Mr. McDaniels would like those reports, but thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlelady, the ranking member from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee.
Good morning. Let me just start again where I mentioned a few themes that I had in the opening statement. And let me acknowledge both Mr. Johnson and Ms. Dean and thank them for their presence here today. And now colleagues here, Mr. Chairman, on the other side of the aisle. Addiction is the bane of our existence, and that is a light word. Demand. Can you just succinctly tell us the crucial aspect that is playing as we go forward in fighting, in essence, use an old-fashioned term, in this war that has to include bringing down demand and then warring with those, unfortunately, who are intent to do evil?
Thank you, Congresswoman. And what I would describe this as right now is a fight to save lives, because we are losing Americans every single day. In terms of demand, I think that what we are seeing with these two cartels is different than what we have ever seen before. So we acknowledge and understand that there are Americans who have substance use disorder and may be seeking controlled substances, narcotics. What we are seeing now is that these two cartels are making fentanyl, which is deadly in tiny amounts. And the cartels are acting with calculated, deliberate treachery to put that fentanyl in other products. And so they are making, mass producing. Last year, DEA seized 58 million fake oxycodone pills that were meant to look identical to real pills, but in fact are fentanyl and filler. And they are marketing them and branding them as though they were the real thing. So they are driving demand, in our view. They are also cutting fentanyl powder into other drugs, as you noted, into cocaine, into heroin, and they are selling those drugs as if they were cocaine or heroin. So fentanyl is being cut into everything, and it is being put into these fake pills. So what we believe is happening is that the cartels care about relentless expansion to make more money, to make billions of dollars. So they are using the most addictive drug that the United States has ever seen, and they are hiding it in other drugs, and they are branding it as though it were legitimate prescription drugs to drive demand, because the more people who take it, the more it's 50 times stronger than heroin, 100 times stronger than morphine, the more likely people are to become addicted and buy again.
Thank you. Let's talk about the fight. My time is short. Can you succinctly describe the lab that the DEA has set up?
Yes. So we have recently set up a new lab. We have 9 labs. We have a new lab called the Joint Intrepid Lab. That is in Epoch. It's in El Paso, Texas right now. We have set that up we asked FDA and Customs and Border Patrol to join us. It is a fentanyl profiling lab, with the idea being that we will immediately test fentanyl as quickly as we can as it gets seized at the border, so we can determine who is responsible for making that fentanyl, what it is made up of, and also have an early warning system for future drugs. It will help our investigations. It will help our cases.
Convince the American people that you are fighting the cartels with every might that you might have. As you do that, the incarcerated kingpin, El Chapo, his work doesn't depend on high migration, low migration, border conditions, etc. He is or the type of work cartels are doing are merciless, murderous, and with a large imprint that goes no matter what's going on. We have to get the cartels. Is that my understanding?
I could not say it more clearly that our top priority is to defeat the cartels, and I believe that's what we have to do. I will say to you that there's nothing that DEA will not do to protect the American people from what we are facing with fentanyl. We're using every authority we can, and we are tracking these two cartels in more than 40 countries around the globe. They are vast criminal organizations, and one thing I think is really important is we targeted and arrested El Chapo. That was a DEA case. We have now pivoted to not just do the heads of the organizations, but to target the entire supply chain, starting in China, going to Mexico, coming into the United States, and then the illicit finance.
Let me ask you this. How devastating is the online sales that penetrates into our younger population or everyone? The pink pills, how devastating is that, and how important it is to have legislation or to have Congress help you fight the online pill sale?
The gentlelady's time has expired, but you may answer the question.
Thank you. We see social media right now as the superhighway of drugs. It is one of the ways that the cartels are using to reach out to every single community in the United States of America, to reach young people. There are more than 100 million Americans on social media, and so it is a very simple, largely anonymous way for them to reach people, and they're also using it to conduct their own business operations.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Lee.
Good morning and welcome. Thank you for being here with us today. So we've talked a lot this morning about fentanyl, and I want to be sure that we also take a moment to focus on the other significant responsibilities of DEA and the other work that you do as well. I know in my home state of Florida, one thing that DEA has long been dedicated to doing is fighting Colombian drug trafficking organizations and some of what they bring through maritime channels. Would you tell us just a little bit about DEA's ongoing efforts in that regard?
Yes, thank you. So we remain focused on narcotics trafficking across the globe, and one of our biggest offices remains in Colombia, because what we see, Congresswoman, is the organizations in Colombia are not just sending some cocaine directly to the United States, they are increasingly sending it through those two cartels. So we are tracking Colombia, Peru, many other countries in South America where cocaine is being produced and is being brought to the United States through all different ways, often in connection with these two criminal cartels that now sort of control the drug markets in the United States. So rest assured, we maintain vigilance on this, and we work very closely, as you I'm sure know, with our partners in the Coast Guard and other law enforcement folks all along the coast of Florida.
And I also want to follow up on something that my colleague, Mr. Nels, touched on earlier, and that is DEA's work alongside in partnership with state and local law enforcement agencies. Would you describe for us how and why that is an impactful effort by DEA and what that provides to local communities in terms of community safety?
Yeah, so I could not begin to say enough about the men and women of DEA who are out in the field and our state and local partners. We also have a large number of task force officers that come to us from police departments and sheriff's offices and state police that work hand in glove with us, and then we just have strong partnerships throughout the state of Florida and throughout the country. We could not do the work we do without those partnerships and without the sharing of information back and forth. Part of what we have been working on internally at DEA is to figure out how can we share even more information, how do we empower local law enforcement, and we've also worked very closely on violence reduction work, something we call Operation Overdrive. We've done it in a number of Florida communities. It's very important to us that we partner with locals to say who are the most dangerous individuals related to drug-related violence and drug poisoning deaths, and then to work in cooperation together to attack that threat.
Thank you. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield the balance of my time to the chair.
Thank you very much. Ms. Milgram, my first question is going to deal with the border. So do you have agents that are watching Mexican plazas?
We have agents that are stationed across all of the southwest border areas, and we do work around Mexican plazas, yes.
Okay. And so that leads to the question of, we know that most illicit drug is interdicted at the ports of entry. And that's because obviously we have personnel there, we have eyes on, we have contact, we have the technology to basically scan a vehicle, we have the technology to determine density readers, we've got dogs who can sniff for drugs and actually humans that are coming across. What's DEA's role in interdiction at the ports of entry?
So let me say it from a high level and then come down to the specifics. We are very focused on the entire global supply chain, starting in China, going to Mexico, coming to the U.S. And the southwest border is a critical part of this conversation because the vast majority of fentanyl is coming across the southwest border. As you say, our understanding is mostly through ports of entry right now in California and Arizona.
That's where most of it's interdicted. Not most of it comes through ports of entry. You would agree with me that most of it is coming between the ports of entry where we don't have We don't have any personnel. We don't have the one-on-one. We don't have the capacity to actually interdict between ports of entry.
So we did a case earlier this year, Congressman, the Chapitos Network investigation, and what we learned from doing that investigation and have charged in the Southern District of New York is that the Chapitos were bringing drugs, into the fentanyl, into the United States by any means they could, by land, by sea, by air, through underground tunnels across the southwest border, using trucks, using cars.
Are they still catapulting? They used to catapult.
We
the
did not
drug
have
stores.
that in that
Okay.
specific case. But to your point, I think we're seeing every sort of the cartels will stop at nothing to get fentanyl into the U.S. because that's how they make more money.
Right, and the reason I bring that up is because I think too many times people think because we seize a lot at the ports of entry, we forget that there is a massive, wide open border. Now, I could take you down there and invite you to come with me sometime. Don't bring staff. I don't bring staff. I'll just drive on down there, go by myself, and it's wide open. I can drive for hours without seeing CBP agents because most of them are pulled off doing something else. My time has expired, so I thank the gentlelady for yielding to me, and I recognize the gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Dean.
Mr. Chairman, there we go. Good to be with you, and thank you for your work, for the work of your 10,000 colleagues on this extraordinarily serious issue, and you always bring to it that gravity and the seriousness of it. I had the opportunity to be with you at the RX Summit in Atlanta alongside my son, Harry, who suffers from substance use disorder and, as you know, is 10 years in recovery. And he and I have talked about it with honesty, with candor, that if he were in active addiction today, his life would have been in grave peril. We know that. We're losing friends, sons, and daughters in my district. So I thank you and your colleagues. In your remarks that were extraordinary at the RX Summit, which echo, of course, much of what you said today, you talked about how much fentanyl is on the ground in the United States right now. Can you speak to that?
Yes, and it was a privilege to hear you and Harry speak at the RX Summit and to hear your story. What we're seeing, last year DEA seized the equivalent of almost 400 million deadly doses of fentanyl, and that's 58 million fake pills made to look like OxyContin, and then about 13,000 pounds of powder. What that means, and we're seizing it in every community, from coast to coast and every community in between. This year, already year to date, we have seized 46 million fake pills containing fentanyl. We have seized more than 200 million deadly doses already in 2023. It has permeated the entire United States and the entire drug supply. And again, we're seeing it not just in pills, but also powder that's then being cut into cocaine and heroin and methamphetamine. And so this is one of the reasons why we spend a lot of time on doing public awareness, public education, and also interdicting, because we know every single deadly dose we get off the street is potentially a life saved.
And talk about that last mile and the staggering number of arrests, but obviously there's much more to do because there's so much on the ground.
So,
how do we interrupt that last mile?
So one of the things we've done is we have now stepped back and we are mapping these two cartels across the globe and across the United States. And so we have been able to identify not just the members of those cartels, but the facilitators, the wholesalers, the money launderers, and also the people in our communities that are that last mile, that are getting that fentanyl into the hands of an American. Some of that, as I said, almost 600 of our cases, about 1,100 of those were cases that we did in that operation over a year. About 600 of them involve social media and encrypted applications. So we know that this sort of last mile is the way that the cartels are using individuals across our communities to get those drugs to Americans. Often, as we all know, within 2 clicks, someone can be delivering a pill that a young American or an American is being told is Oxy or Percocet or Xanax. It's being delivered to their front door. They take half a pill or a whole pill and they die, and there are no second chances. And to be really clear, those pills are being mass produced in Mexico. The fentanyl is being mass produced in Mexico. So in that community, when that ends up on someone's doorstep, the person who has purchased it has no idea often that there's fentanyl in it, or how much fentanyl. And again, we're seeing people die at catastrophic and devastating rates.
Absolutely, and I want to be clear, you don't have to be an addict to suffer a fatal overdose. Young people just experimenting, thinking they're buying Percocet, and they're not.
Yes.
I guess I'd like to understand a little better what DEA does to confront in a global way the financial networks. How do we interrupt those?
So one of the things we did is we started these two counter threat teams that are focused on these two cartels across the globe. We started to see connections across the globe, and particularly connections with illicit finance. One of the things we talk a lot about is the fact that we're also seeing a lot of Chinese money laundering from the drug cartels in the United States. It has pivoted now to be largely driven by Chinese money laundering. So as we started to pull together all of our information across our 334 offices, we realized very quickly that we needed to build a third team that is devoted solely to illicit finance. So we are tracking billions of dollars across the globe. We are tracking cryptocurrency. We are tracking money going from the cartels to Chinese chemical companies, and you will see in the months ahead extensive work that we are now doing around illicit finance. I couldn't begin to say how important it is. It's also very time consuming. We are fortunate the IRS has just given us an 1811 agent to help us do some of this financial work. We have asked for other law enforcement agencies and components to give us additional financial expertise. We have some, but what we are now seeing with these billions of dollars moving globally is that, as many people and as many resources as we can put on this, we will uncover more and more billions of dollars. And I think this is a critical way to attack the cartels.
Absolutely. And I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for indulging the end of that answer.
Absolutely.
Thank you for your work. I stand ready to continue to work with you in any way that I can.
Thank you.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gates.
So one reason people die from fentanyl is because they get addicted to opioids and get poisoned, right?
Yes.
And one reason that people get addicted to opioids is because they get prescribed opioids and that prescription turns into an addiction, right?
So I would absolutely say the beginning of the opioid epidemic started with unlawful prescribing.
Right. Not everyone, but that's a pretty large swath of the problem. And one of the reasons people get prescribed opioids is to deal with chronic pain, right?
Yes.
And throughout the country, there are people who use medical marijuana to treat chronic pain as an alternative to opioids, right?
I know a number of states have passed laws, yes, related to medical marijuana.
So I guess my question is this. Why has the Biden administration not taken marijuana off the list of Schedule I drugs?
So, Congressman, as you know, the president had sent a letter to the Secretary of HHS and to the Attorney General to ask for the scheduling, descheduling process to begin. It's now with HHS. They are in that process. They start, then they send it to DEA. We have not received it yet.
That's encouraging. When do you expect to receive that recommendation from HHS?
I have not heard of a timeline from them, so I don't know.
Well, that's unsettling, isn't it? I mean, when you don't even know a timeline, it doesn't really make it seem like something's front of mind.
We have constant conversations with HHS and with FDA, but we have not been given a specific timeline.
Will you leave this briefing and encourage HHS to give you a timeline on getting that information to you?
I will ask.
Thank you. And when you receive the work product from HHS, is there any basis that DEA would have to oppose the descheduling of marijuana as a Schedule I drug?
So the way the scheduling process works under the law and the regulations is HHS does a review. They then send it to DEA. We then do what is known as an 8-factor review. There's an opportunity for public comment as well. And so we go through that part of the process. And so obviously we start with what HHS has provided us. We then go through our own review and a public comment process, and then we come to a scheduling decision.
And just share with me, with the country, what your perspective is on what the outcome of that should be.
Well, because I couldn't prejudge it at this point in time, I have not seen.
Do you have a personal view on whether or not marijuana should be a Schedule I drug?
As the head of the DEA, I will ultimately be responsible for signing off on what the scheduling is.
Will you consider in the analysis that's being done the studies that pretty extensively show that in states where there is medical marijuana access, there's a lower rate of prescribing these opioids that then can lead to addiction, which then can lead to the deaths that we've seen?
You have my full commitment, Congressman, that I will keep an open mind. I will look at all the research. I expect that we will get, additional public comment or research that comes in, and I will look at all of it.
And, Mr. Chairman, I'd seek unanimous consent to enter into the record a study conducted by two PhDs, Marie Hayes and Mark Brown, that looked at the prescribing of opioids in states with medical marijuana programs and indeed found that states with medical cannabis laws had a 24.8 lower mean annual opioid overdose mortality rate.
Without objection.
I really hope we get this done. We're 2 years into the Biden administration, and I honestly had hoped that by now we would have already descheduled marijuana from the Schedule 1 list. Maybe talk to me a little bit about the challenges that DEA has in this patchwork system where marijuana is federally illegal, but then hemp is allowed under the Farm Bill, and then you got people operating under the color of law in all these states. I mean, doesn't that seem like the least effective way to go about this?
If I could speak more generally about our diversion program, which is the unit that controls all of the scheduling, all these questions you're raising, this is an important part of our work at DEA right now, is to look at the existing regulations and the existing processes.
But it's hard, right? I want to draw from you the obvious admission that different states having different programs, and then the federal government having sort of an incongruent regulatory system with the hemp law and Schedule 1 being maintained, that is confusing.
And we deal with it, Congressman, all the time.
And it makes it harder, right? The fact that it's patchwork does probably make the job of DEA agents harder.
Even look at xylazine right now, which is something we're having conversations about, is lacing fentanyl. It is certain states have now moved to schedule xylazine. It has not yet been scheduled in the federal government. So these are challenges we face all the time.
And I would just also add, there's a huge research potential to unlock if we get this right, and I certainly hope that we do. And I appreciate your commitment to gild the lily at HHS and get that work product in your hands. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And firstly, I'd like to incorporate by reference all of Mr. Gates's questions. I agree with him totally on where we are. I've been here 17 years, and it's not your fault, but I've seen DEA heads, I've seen FBI directors, I've seen attorney generals sit exactly where you're saying and say governmental gibberish about marijuana. They've done nothing for 17 years and for years before that, and it goes back to the 30s. And the government has messed this up forever, and you need to get ahead of the railroad. You're going to get something from HHS. Biden understands it should be reclassified. He said from 1 to 3, it ought to be classified from 1 to 420. And we ought to just clean it up and get over with it. Fentanyl was Schedule 1 and Schedule 2s. It's been Schedule 2 drug for a while, and fentanyl substances have been in Schedule 1 since 2018. But since we changed it, we've had an increase, a 460% increase in fentanyl traffic offenders. For related substances, it's been up 208%. Obviously, changing the rating, the scheduling, and raising it doesn't stop the use. It's popular. There's money to be made. You caught El Chapo, you put him in prison, his sons took over the operation. There are rats that replace the big rats. That happens in the drug trade. You've got to have a better answer. You've got to do something different. This is going to go on until your great-grandchildren are sitting in this chair as DEA head. What do you think is the best way to stop, first on marijuana? Is there anything you can do to expedite your process by starting some of the laborious, tedious, time-consuming roles put in front of you by doing them now before HHS gives it to you?
Unfortunately, Congressman, and I understand the frustration on the timing. Our process is triggered when HHS sends a recommendation to us, and so that will trigger it. What I will say to you, not specific to marijuana, but just overall, is that I am committed on trying to move things as quickly as we can at DEA.
I'm going to help you, but I'm going to call the secretary, who was one of my colleagues, and I'm going to call him today. We're going to get this moving. Now, tell me on fentanyl, I'd like to stop that too. That's a scourge. The Republicans had a bill. I didn't think it was necessarily the answer. I felt bad not voting for it because I hate what fentanyl has done to so many people and such a killer. You seem to be your main target is going after these two gangs. Well, you're going to have new gangs after that. Is there a better way to do it than just taking out one gang and then letting the new gang come up and be around when your great-grandchild is in your job?
So If I could, Congressman, when I came in, we had a largely high-value target focus, meaning we were focused on El Chapo, who the leaders of those criminal organizations were. That is an important thing to do, but in my assessment over the first months that I was in office, it's not enough for the exact reason you say. We took El Chapo out of Mexico. He's incarcerated for the rest of his life on those charges, and his sons took over and they transformed his criminal business to be fentanyl. And this is harder now than it's ever been because this is chemical drugs. And so the only limit, there are no growing seasons, there is no transportation from Colombia to the US, there is literally just a question of how many chemicals these criminal organizations can get. And then if there's an unlimited amount of chemicals, there's an unlimited amount of fentanyl. So we have transformed the way we work to do the entire criminal network. Starting in China, where the vast majority of precursor chemicals are coming from, we've just charged 4 Chinese chemical companies for the first time ever, 8 Chinese nationals, 2 of whom are in custody. Transporting that to Mexico. We're focused on that transportation work. We do some of that in partnership with other federal partners. In Mexico, we're focused on the people who are mass producing the fentanyl, the chemists, the cooks, the people who run the labs, the security apparatus and the assassins, the people who transport it into the United States, the associates and facilitators who are working in the United States, and then the entire global money laundering arm. So we are focused on the entire network now. We know this model is effective because it will allow us to attack the vulnerabilities, and we're making progress. We have a lot of work to do. A single American death is unacceptable, and so we have a lot more work to do, but I do believe that focusing on the entire network and being strategic in understanding that network and understanding how that network is changing and how the sort of smaller networks are coming up will long-term put us in the best position.
Almost out of time. Do you need more money?
Yes, sir, always.
How much more money do you need?
Whatever funding we're given, I promise, I commit to you, we will use to save American lives.
Thank you.
Gentleman's chime has expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Kiley.
Good morning. Good morning, Administrator Milgram. You testified today that Americans are experiencing the most devastating drug crisis in our nation's history. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you pointed out that in 2022, more than 110,000 people in the United States lost their lives to drug poisonings, correct?
Yes.
And you also noted that fentanyl is now the leading cause of death for Americans between the ages of 18 to 45.
That's correct.
So it's precisely because I agree with you and because we are in such a crisis right now that I find some of your priorities as DEA administrator to be puzzling, and I'm concerned about the effect of some of your personnel and contracting decisions on the capacity of the DEA to carry out its mission and the morale of DEA employees. So let's start with Louis Million, if I'm saying that correctly. Milioni. Okay, he recently resigned as second in command at DEA. I made revelations that he did consulting work for Purdue Pharma. Is that correct?
What I would say, and first of all, let me say, I believe that we have the best men and women in the United States government. Mr. Milioni came back with me as the principal deputy. I asked him to come back, and he had agreed to a 2-year term of service, which he fulfilled. So I would not connect those two things.
But you did ask him to come back?
I did, yes,
And
sir.
at the time, did you know about his work for Purdue?
He informed me before he came in, yes.
He did. So you were aware that he did $600 per hour consulting work for Purdue Pharma?
Well, I wouldn't say I was aware of the specific details.
The general nature of his work.
What I understood, Congressman, is that he had done work for law firms that had prepared an expert report and while they were representing Purdue Pharma.
Well, he prepared the report. He was the expert.
Doing work for the law firms, yes.
And you know that Purdue has pleaded guilty to various criminal charges. Is that
Yes, that's correct.
Correct. And that Mr. Milioni's report was generally favorable towards Purdue. Is that correct?
I have not reviewed the report.
Okay. But you were aware that he was hired by the firm that was representing them?
When I was nominated to come in, I asked the question of many former agents, current agents, prosecutors, who the best DEA agent in America was, and the answer I got repeatedly was Lou Milioni.
And that didn't seem like a conflict to you, his work for Purdue?
He alerted me before he came in of that work. There is a long-standing recusal process at the United States Department of Justice.
Right, but I
and
mean,
an
just in
ethics
general,
review.
you don't think it was a conflict for him to be there at all?
I believe in the recusal and ethics process at the Department of Justice. I relied on that. He was never once in any conversations or meetings related to Purdue.
Okay, let's talk about the report, the Foreign Operations Review conducted by Wilmer Hale. Why was this not done in-house?
So one of the things I found when I came in is that going back a decade or two, there had been a series of reports and internal reviews at DEA and also reviews by the Inspector General related to our foreign work. What we hadn't done is step back. We just turned 50. We hadn't stepped back in almost 50 years to ask the question, how can we do our foreign work most effectively?
You wanted an outside perspective, a more independent perspective.
We wanted the perspective of both prosecutors and law enforcement of, again, going back to the conversation.
But why did you do it outside rather than in-house? Because you wanted it to be independent.
Going back to the conversation we started this morning, so much of our work is based on foreign criminal cartels. And so we wanted individuals who understood the value of our foreign work as well as...
And you didn't have any such people in-house?
We absolutely do, and those people in-house worked with the foreign review team very closely.
Did you offer this contract as a sort of, to any, do a bidding process, or did you just give it to Wilmer Hale?
It was a sole source contract.
Okay. Are they the only law firm in town, or why did you go just right to them?
What I would say is when we started this process of trying to understand what we were looking at and how to sort of take a global view of it, one of the questions we asked was who had worked on DEA international cases. Boyd Johnson, who I met after I had been nominated, I was introduced to him.
Did you talk to Preet Bharara about hiring Wilmer Hale?
I did not.
You did not. But that's a close friend of yours, Preet Bharara, is that correct?
Yes, and he and I worked together on Capitol Hill, and then we had a podcast together.
And one of the review's authors, Boyd Johnson, is a close associate of Preet Bharara, is that correct?
They currently work together now. At the time, I did not know Boyd Johnson. I was introduced to him by others when I was going through my confirmation
he has that
process.
relationship with Preet Bharara.
And if I could, Congressman, Boyd Johnson led the International Narcotics Unit in the Southern District of New York, which is where we do the bulk of our bilateral investigations unit work.
And I see here that Jack Lawn, the other author of the review, apparently worked for an industry group that funded research by your mother. Is that correct?
I believe in the late 90s, my mom worked with Jack Lawn for a brief period of time. This is...
And Preet Bharara, where does he work now?
Congressman, may I continue?
I'm sorry, I'm short on time. Where does Preet Bharara work now?
He works in many places.
Which law firm?
He's now at Wilmer Hale.
And you also hired, as your deputy chief of staff, someone from Wilmer Hale as well, right?
Yes, we have someone who I've worked with at
You may
NYU.
answer the question.
And do you think this casts doubt on the independence of this review, all of these connections between you and Wilmer Hale?
Congressman,
I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. You may answer the
May I
question.
answer?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. The work that has come out of the Foreign Review has been transformational for DEA. We have changed the way we operate, and they have made very important recommendations to us. Number one, reduce silos between the foreign and international work that we do. Number two, increase accountability. And number three, make sure that every piece of foreign work is directed at saving American lives. And so we've already implemented a number of changes. I'd be happy to show them to you at some point in time, but I do believe very much that the value of that review has been exceptional.
Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Georgia, Ms. Milgram.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and good morning, Administrator Milgram. I have read your testimony. Thank you for coming before the Judiciary Committee to testify, and we do appreciate your time and your willingness to share today with us all this information. Administrator Milgram, you know as well as I do that the Drug Enforcement Administration plays an essential role in protecting our neighborhoods from dangerous substances. And the men and women of this agency do work diligently, as you've been explaining to us today, to disrupt the networks of the drug cartels and to bring justice to those that are trafficking these harmful substances to our communities. I am not an attorney on this committee. I'm not an attorney on judiciary, but I am a mother. And so I agree that these efforts that you're putting forth and others are truly essential. When raising my son Jordan, I made sure to surround him with friends and family who I knew were going to really provide a loving and supportive environment for him. And there are countless mothers like me that are still doing their part. They're doing the same thing. But the unfortunate reality is that opioids, like fentanyl, continue to seep into our communities and into our homes and into the bodies of those that we love and care for. Countless mothers like me, like myself, are paralyzed by the threat of these substances and the threats that they pose to our children and our loved ones' well-being. Can you please illustrate the supply chain of fentanyl-related substances and how they are reaching American neighborhoods? I really would like for that to be clarified from, but definitely from initial manufacturers to the dealers and, that sell these deadly products. Please clarify that for us.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about the critically important substance of DEA's work. And I would share your concern as a mother. I will tell you, we have the opportunity to meet with families all the time who have lost loved ones, who are out in communities trying to raise public awareness. We now have the faces of more than 5,000 Americans who've lost, whose lives were lost to drug poisoning that line the walls of DEA headquarters. And I routinely walk past those faces. I see the faces of America, and there are often moms and dads and brothers and sisters who are there. So I could not agree more of how vital this is. The supply chain that we see right now begins in China with precursor chemical companies that are producing chemicals that are essentially the building blocks of fentanyl and also methamphetamine. Those chemicals are then being shipped to Mexico or to other locations in Latin America and then brought into Mexico, where they are being cooked, essentially using recipes to make fentanyl. So the vast majority of fentanyl that is coming into the United States is being mass produced in Mexico. First, it is produced as powder, and then it is pressed into pills. Some of it does come across the border as powder. Some of it comes across the border as pills. Most of those pills are made to look like the small blue oxycodone 30 milligrams that are coming into the United States. As I said earlier, we know from our investigative work and the evidence we have in cases that the cartels are pushing the fentanyl across the border through every way. Once it's in the U.S., there are a series of hubs that the cartels generally use to bring the fentanyl in, and it's coming in polydrug, meaning they're bringing in fentanyl with meth, with cocaine, often with heroin, and then it goes into our communities.
Am I correct in stating, because I want to clarify this for the record, that 90% of fentanyl from Mexico seized in the United States was discovered at legal entry points or interior vehicle checkpoints, not illegal crossing routes. Am I correct?
I think that CBP statistic is of all the fentanyl that has been seized at the border across the United States. DEA seizes, because we seize and we're working in communities across the country, we seize across the United States. So I wouldn't say that 90% of DEA seizures is at the border, but I've read that same piece of information. That's the Customs Border Patrol information of the fentanyl crossing the southwest border. They've reported that 90% is coming through the ports.
Okay, thank you. I have one more question for you. Many of my colleagues on the other side are attempting to use fentanyl crisis as a way to demonize immigrants. And so these are some of the same families that we live among every single day. Their children are in our classrooms, and as a representative to one of the most diverse districts in this nation, can you please clarify to the committee who exactly traffics these products into our communities?
So I have also read the CBP reporting on this, that it is mostly predominantly Americans crossing the border with fentanyl. What we see across the United States is we see cartel members, obviously, who are working across the United States, facilitators and associates, but then the last mile individuals are people in communities across the United States, often Americans, sometimes others.
Thank you. I'm out of time.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Administrator Milgram, you've led a distinguished career, starting out with clerking for a federal district court judge, and after that you became an assistant district attorney in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And then after that, you went to work for the criminal section of the Civil Rights Division of the United States Department of Justice. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And you served as the Special Litigation Counsel for Human Trafficking and led the department's human trafficking prosecutors. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And thereafter, you became counsel to a United States senator.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes, Senator Corzine.
And after that, you became acting attorney general for the state of New Jersey.
Yes.
And thereafter, you became the Attorney General of the state of New Jersey and
Yes,
served with distinction. And then you went into the private sector, worked for a foundation for a number of years, and thereafter you became a professor and at New York University School of Law. And now you find yourself as administrator of the Drug Enforcement Administration.
Yes, sir.
And so during your long and illustrious career, you've had the opportunity to meet people and to assess their worth and their ability to contribute to this war on fentanyl that you are engaged in at this point. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, it is.
And also, I want to commend you for your zero tolerance of sexism and racism within the DEA, which used to have a reputation as a good old boys network. I want to thank you for that. And you brought new people in, and you are embarked upon this war to help save the lives of so many people in this country. Can you tell me the difference between the war on fentanyl versus the war on crack cocaine waged by the DEA back in the 80s under that good old boy network?
So, Congressman, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to address this. When I came in 2021, the United States had seen, in 2019, 70,000 Americans had died from drug poisoning in 2019. In 2021, when I came in, almost 107,000 Americans had died from drug poisoning. My very clear assessment is that we were going in the wrong direction very quickly, and that the cartels had evolved, and we needed to transform the way we work. We needed to look at this problem with fresh eyes, with clear perspective, and have the best and brightest leaders, the best team we possibly can have, and transform from the way we operated to working strategically across the globe to essentially defeat what is a global threat. We have hired and promoted more than 900 people since I came in. We have built 25 new positions, including an associate administrator position to oversee our business operations. In addition to the counter threat teams, we've built geospatial teams. We've built all the capacity that I believe a modern law enforcement agency needs to have to be effective, to work with strategy and precision. And at every moment, and I want to be as clear as I can be on this, I've acted with urgency. Americans are dying. If we wait a year to act, we know the cost of that is 110,000 American lives. And so we have transformed our vision, our team, and everything we can. In terms of what is different now, fentanyl has transformed completely the criminal landscape, and it is a global fentanyl supply chain. There is nothing we have ever seen that is close to what fentanyl is. And again, I would say a big part of that is because of the chemical nature that these cartels are now manufacturing drugs out of chemicals. And as I've said, the only limit is the number of chemicals they can get. They are now building that expertise to create fentanyl in labs across Mexico. So when we start to look at this, it's coming into the United States, and we have to be focused on what's happening in our country because Americans are dying. But my very strong view is that in order to be effective, we have to attack every single part of that supply chain. We have to go after, as aggressively as we ever have, the money that is going back to the cartels, the money laundering that we are seeing happening right now, the Chinese money laundering organizations. And we are seeing this, and I would welcome any member of this committee who wants to come out to the counter threat teams where we could show you in more depth what we're seeing on illicit finance, but it is a spider web across the globe of cryptocurrency and billions of dollars. So in our communities, cryptocurrency, we still see traditional money laundering, but there's a very big shift to cryptocurrency. So this is an entirely different piece that we're seeing. The other piece that is dramatically different, Congressman, is that...
The gentleman's time has expired. I'll let you continue, but encourage you to wrap up quickly.
Is that the level of treachery and deception that the cartels are using to try to get Americans to take fentanyl by hiding it in these fake pills, by cutting it into cocaine or heroin or meth and not telling people that it's there.
Thank you. Thank you for your service.
Thank you,
The
sir.
gentleman's time's expired. I recognize now the ranking member, Ms. Jackson Lee, for some unanimous consents.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me submit into the record, Texas Public Radio, more than 5 Texans die every day from fentanyl. A new online dashboard is tracking these deaths. U.S. drug overdose deaths hit a record in 2022 as some states see a big surge. DEA leader calls for a crackdown on social media companies amid fentanyl crisis. I'm submitting into the record the summary of H.R. 4272, my legislation, the Stop Fentanyl Now Act of 2023, which focuses on crackdown as well as creating outreach policies to educate the public even more about the devastation and the dastardliness of fentanyl. Unanimous consent for the Washington Post amid overdose crisis, disputes grow over how to classify fentanyl cousins. Fentanyl is dominating headlines, but there's a more comprehensive drug problem happening in Texas. Finally, from the fentanyl trafficking offenses quick facts document, fiscal year 2022, this was fentanyl trafficking, introduced this particular document that represents the demographics of the utilization of fentanyl and offenders. 2 documents are here, Mr. Chairman. I ask unanimous consent. Thank you.
Without objection, so ordered. And I'll recognize myself for some unanimous consents. Letter from Senator Chuck Grassley dated April 20th, 2023, on article AP News dated April 19th, 2023, and also another piece dated March 24th, 2023. Without objection, so ordered. And now recognize myself for 5 minutes for questioning. Again, thank you for being here today. As part of our oversight, I want to point out that prior to your appointment as administrator, the DEA provided U.S. intelligence and resources to former Mexican Secretary of Public Security, Genaro Garcia Luna, despite credible evidence that Garcia Luna was working with the Sinaloa cartel. Garcia Luna has since been convicted of his crimes, and the reason I bring it up is that Senator Grassley, I know, has asked for DEA records of Garcia Luna's criminal activity to aid congressional oversight. A letter dated February 22nd, 23, and one dated June 28th, 2023. No response has been given. I'm asking if you would please respond, and then I'd like a copy of what you provide, and when might we expect a response?
Congressman, I'll check on the status of that letter, and of course, we'll send you a copy of the response.
Can you impose a self-imposed action item deadline for us?
Sir, it goes back and forth between the Department of Justice and DEA, so we will work as expeditiously as possible to get that
Maybe
cleared.
a week?
I will
At least give me hope.
I will give you hope that I will tell you that I will prioritize it.
Very good. On July 25th of this year, there was a high-level meeting and held in Mexico to discuss efforts to disrupt fentanyl trafficking. And we had a whole series of U.S. personnel and agencies represented there. But I noticed that DEA was not mentioned in the press release related to that. I wondered if someone was there from DEA, and if not, why not?
I believe the deputy attorney, I have not looked closely at the press release, but I know the deputy attorney general was there, has been in Mexico, was there as recently as yesterday, representing the entire department. So DEA, ATF, FBI, she would be representing us.
So I would have imagined that you guys might have had somebody there, because I know you have people on the ground in Mexico. So I was kind of surprised not to see you listed independently, because even though you're working across agencies, interagencies, I would have thought you would have been there for that. Additionally, Senator Grassley conducted an investigation and revealed that DEA broke protocol, slow-walking some indictments of Los Chapitos, and so and it resulted in a month-long delay. And my question is his investigative report accurate? Have you seen that report?
I have not seen the report, but if I could speak to this overall, I think it's worth touching on just for a minute, which is when I came in, DEA had numerous cases against the Chapitos, as did other federal law enforcement agencies, 2011, 2014, 2019. No one had charged the Chapitos or their network with fentanyl trafficking. Given that we believe they are one of the largest trafficking organizations for Sinaloa, we believed it was important that we proactively investigate not just the Chapitos, which we had already charged and investigated for cocaine and methamphetamine and marijuana previously, but that we go after them as well and their entire network for fentanyl, and that's how we ended up with charging 28 individuals.
And his investigation also indicates that Mexico was not notified of the indictments. Is that accurate? I mean,
Congressman, let me be very clear in saying this. We have had provisional arrest warrants on the ground in Mexico since 2011, 2014, and 2019 for the arrests of the Chapitos. When I came in—
all of these Chapitos?
The main Chapitos that were charged in other districts, yes. When I came in, I also worked with the State Department to increase the reward on those provisional arrest warrants based in Mexico.
So if I understand from your answer, you're telling me that Mexico had been informed of the indictments then?
Mexico had been informed of prior indictments. Our indictment was ongoing. So we would not inform them till we charged the case, and obviously now we have informed them and given provisional arrest warrants down. Okay,
and I was pleased to hear you testify earlier today that you've stood up kind of, I guess, a business, I'm going to call it a business interruption task force, because I do think that's one of the key components if you want to ring in, you have to disincentivize the cartels. What tools do you need that you don't think you have? I mean, I view this as kind of a quasi-RICO type of operation. Are you using forensic accountants? And what problems do you have both with the Mexican government and also with U.S. financial institutions who are facilitating money laundering operations, even some of our nation's biggest banking operations?
So just starting with tools, yes, we need more tools.
And my time's expired, but you can answer.
We need more tools and we need more expertise. We need accountants, we need financial experts, we need linguists. I'd very much like to see us look to build non-career paths to get expertise in. And when we think about tools, one of the things that I am very focused on is not having all the tools at our Special Operations Division, but actually getting those tools out to the field. So this is one of the things I think is critical for us to do over the next years to get the men and women doing the investigations as many tools as we can. I'd like to get them data scientists. I'd like to get them accountants and financial experts. But you touch on, I think, one of the most important things, which is we have to set up our government to do the work that needs to be done to interdict these billions of dollars.
So I'll close, and I thank you for being here, and I can tell you that I'd be much more amenable to shifting $7 million to these type of personnel than I would for hybrid Priuses. But with that, thank you for being here, and this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.